The wind moved through the old ranch house like it carried memories no one wanted to remember. It rattled the loose shutters, pushed dust across the wooden floor, and whispered through the cracks in the wall, as if reminding the man in the chair of the life he once had. He sat near the window where the sunlight fell in a soft line across his motionless legs. Once, those legs had carried him across canyons, through hunting trails, and over long frontier roads. Now they stayed still, no matter how hard he clenched his jaw or stared at them, wishing something would change. The quiet weight of it pressed on him each day, settling deeper in his chest. He had been a strong man, known for his courage and for the way he could ride for hours without tiring. In the old American frontier towns, people noticed those things. Men respected him, women admired him from a distance, and children watched him with the kind of awe that only comes from seeing someone who seemed unshakable. But everything changed the day his horse stumbled near a rocky ridge. The fall had crushed more than his bones. It left him in a wheelchair he never thought he would need, and trapped him in a silence he could not escape. The wide-open land that once felt like freedom became a reminder of everything he lost. Most days he kept to himself. He did not want people to see him like this, not even the friendly folks who lived nearby. He pushed them away with short answers and long silences, hoping they would stop trying to help. The world felt small now, like a shrinking circle he could not break out of. Each morning came with the same thought that weighed heavier than the day before. He had lost his strength, lost his purpose, and lost the life that once made him feel whole. He could not imagine anyone seeing value in a man who could no longer stand on his own feet, but life on the frontier had a way of bringing unexpected paths together. It happened on a late afternoon when the sun painted gold across the open fields. The door to the room opened quietly. Someone stepped inside with a calm presence that did not disturb the air, but changed it all the same. She wore a blue dress that brushed lightly around her ankles, and her hands stayed folded in front of her, as if she did not want to appear bold or intrusive. Her voice carried a gentle steadiness when she spoke, something warm that softened even the harshest mood. Everyone in town knew that she was different from the others. She had grown up in a place where people judged quickly, yet she carried no bitterness in her eyes. She worked hard, spoke with kindness, and treated others with a steady patience that made her stand out quietly. She had always admired strong spirits, and even though the man before her looked defeated, she sensed a courage in him that had not fully gone out. She stepped closer, not with pity, but with a quiet respect he did not expect. He glanced at her with a sharpness that came from habit, ready to distance himself again. But she held her ground with a sincerity that caught him off guard. The room felt lighter somehow, as if the dust itself paused to watch them. No one had spoken to him with such calm lately, and he found himself listening, even though he wanted to stay guarded. She told him that the world had not ended for him, that the frontier still held a place for a man like him. He did not answer. He could not. Listening alone already felt like a burden. She stayed by the window, letting the warm light fall across her dress. The land behind her stretched wide and peaceful, a reminder of what he once loved. She told him that she believed a man's worth was not tied to how far he could walk or how fast he could ride. She spoke of heart, spirit, and the strength that grows in silence. He wanted to argue, wanted to push her away like he had everyone else. But her words slipped past the defenses he had spent months building. People in town whispered that she had a way of seeing the good in others, even when they could not see it in themselves. He wondered what she saw in him, sitting helpless in that old wooden chair. She looked at him like he was still the same man, like his injury had not erased who he had been. That unsettled him more than anything. It made something inside him shift, something he was not ready to face. As she walked around the room, her movements held a quiet confidence that made him look at her more than he meant to. She touched the windowsill, tracing the old wood as if she were considering a future she could not speak out loud yet. He felt a flicker inside him, a feeling he had not allowed himself to acknowledge. He pushed it down quickly. He did not deserve hope. Hope felt dangerous outside. The horses grazed lazily in the warm sun. The land smelled of dust and pine, carrying the familiar scent of the old American frontier. She spoke softly about the future, not hers alone, but what she believed could still be his. He tried to look away, tried to harden himself again, but she kept returning to him with a look that was steady and unshaken. It made his chest tighten in a way he had not felt since before the accident. She asked him what he feared most, and the question struck him deeper than any wound. He wanted to say he feared staying this way forever. He wanted to say he feared he would never be the man he once was. But the truth he could not speak out loud was even heavier. He feared that no one would ever see him as a man worth loving again. He feared becoming nothing more than a reminder of loss. He feared that if he let someone close, they would see the brokenness he tried so hard to hide. But she already saw him. She saw the quiet pain he carried, the frustration in his shoulders, the strength he tried to bury, and the good heart still fighting beneath the surface. And instead of stepping back, she stepped closer. Her voice softened as she told him he was not alone. Not anymore. Her words lingered in the air, warm and gentle. Something inside him stirred in a way he could not deny. He looked up at her with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. She met his eyes without hesitation, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The light from the window framed her face, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. It frightened him how much that meant. The room felt different now. Like the beginning of a story neither of them was ready to name. Before he could speak, a sound outside caught her attention. She turned her head slowly, and her expression shifted. Something in the distance had changed the air. The horses lifted their heads. The wind paused. And the calm afternoon suddenly felt uncertain. She stepped closer to the window, eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to understand what was happening beyond the quiet fields. He watched her, sensing the tension forming in her posture. The quiet moment between them slipped away as a new unease settled into the room. She turned back to him with a look that carried both worry and determination. Whatever was happening outside was not small. It was something that could change everything. And in that moment, he understood that the fragile peace he had felt was only the beginning. She took a slow breath, her hand hovering near the window, and whispered that they were not alone on the land anymore. Then she looked at him, waiting for a reaction he was not sure he could give. He tried to move his legs, tried to stand, tried to force himself into the man he once was. But nothing happened. The weight of his helplessness pressed down again, sharper than before. The wind shifted once more, carrying a distant sound across the fields. She looked toward the door, then back at him with a seriousness he had never seen in her eyes. Before he could ask anything, she reached for his arm with steady courage, as if preparing him for whatever was coming next. And that was when the shadow passed across the window. The shadow moved across the window so quickly that, for a moment, he wondered if his tired eyes had imagined it. But she tightened her grip on his arm, and the way her fingers curled with instinct told him she had seen it too. The light in the room dimmed just enough to unsettle the air, and the horses outside grew restless. One of them let out a short, sharp sound, its hooves scraping against the dirt in warning. She stepped closer to him, as if ready to shield him even though he knew she had no reason to protect a man who could not even stand. Yet she stayed firm, her presence steadying the room. The wind outside picked up, pushing the thin curtain inward, and the scent of dust grew stronger. She took a slow breath and walked toward the window with quiet caution. He tried to turn the wheelchair toward her, but the wheels caught slightly on the old wooden floor. He hated that feeling, the helplessness that sat deep in his bones. But she did not let him struggle. She reached back and gently moved the chair so he could face the window. He did not ask her to. She simply understood. The land outside stretched wide, the tall grass shifting in uneven waves. Nothing looked out of place at first glance, yet something felt wrong. There was no movement from the riders who usually passed by the road at this hour. No familiar voices from the ranch hands working near the barn. No sign of anyone else at all. The silence grew heavy. She narrowed her eyes toward the tree line far beyond the field, her breath slowing the way someone does when trying to recognize a threat. He watched her closely, noticing the way her shoulders tensed. She rarely showed fear, even in uncertain moments. Her voice always carried a calm strength he admired, even if he rarely admitted it. But now something had unsettled her too. She asked if he had ever seen anything strange near the ridge since the injury. He hesitated. not sure if he should mention the quiet footsteps he sometimes heard late at night or the strange tracks he noticed once near the barn. He dismissed them back then, thinking his mind was playing tricks under the weight of loneliness. Now he was no longer sure. He told her that nothing certain had happened, only small things he convinced himself were nothing. She listened with seriousness, as though even the smallest detail mattered. She told him she had heard from the ranch owner that livestock had gone missing near the far pasture. At first they thought it was stray wolves passing through. But wolves did not leave clean cuts in fences or move silently without a sign of struggle. Whatever it was, it did not behave like a wild animal. She turned from the window and looked at him again. Her eyes carried a mix of worry and determination that he had come to recognize. She refused to be frightened easily, and it took more than shadows to shake her. Still, she could not deny the tension settling into the air. Something was out there, something neither of them could explain yet. She moved around the room, checking the doors and windows without saying much, as if her instincts told her to prepare for something approaching. He felt frustration building quietly inside him. The room seemed smaller than before, trapping him in his chair while she handled everything. His pride burned in a way he could not hide. He wanted to protect her, to stand beside her the way he once did for others. But when he tried again to move his legs, nothing happened. The numb stillness reminded him of everything he lost. She noticed the struggle in his eyes, but said nothing. Instead, she placed a steady hand on his shoulder, a silent reassurance he did not know he needed. She asked him to tell her more about the day of the accident, something he avoided talking about with anyone. He looked toward the window, remembering the sound of the horse stumbling, the crack of impact, and the weight of rocks pressing down against him. The memory brought a familiar heaviness, yet her calm interest made him speak more openly than before. He told her he had been riding alone, scouting near the ridge after hearing rumors of strangers passing through the frontier. He heard movement behind him just before the fall, but he never saw what caused it. At the time, he believed the ground simply gave way under his horse, but now he questioned it. The memory felt sharper, clearer, as if the shadow outside had pulled the truth closer. She listened carefully, her expression tightening with every detail. She said the ridge had always carried a strange quietness, even before his accident. Travelers sometimes passed through that area without returning to town. People dismissed it as bad luck or the harshness of frontier life. But she believed something else was happening there, something no one had investigated long enough to understand. Her voice dropped slightly as she said that whatever cast the shadow across the window had been watching the ranch for some time. He felt a chill run through him. He had spent months trying to ignore signs, convincing himself they were nothing. Now they carried weight he could not ignore. She stood in the center of the room, her blue dress moving gently as the breeze slipped through a crack. Her presence steadied him, even as his heart grew heavier with uncertainty. The land outside no longer felt familiar. It felt like something waiting. She turned toward his wheelchair and told him she had come to the ranch for more than just daily chores or brief visits. She had been watching over him quietly, noticing the changes around the property. She believed that someone or something had been drawn to the ranch long before his accident, and that he might have been targeted without realizing it. He stared at her in confusion, trying to piece together her quiet worry and the look in her eyes that suggested she had known more than she let on. He asked her why she never mentioned any of this before. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the walls could listen. She said she feared he would push her away again, the way he pushed away everyone who tried to help him, but she could not stay silent anymore. She told him he mattered too much now to ignore the danger, and the words lingered between them with a meaning deeper than simple concern. Something in her tone made him look at her differently, as though a hidden truth lived beneath her steady gaze. She turned back to the window one more time, studying the fields. The wind carried another faint sound, something like a low rustle far beyond the fence line. The horses grew uneasy again, shifting their stance with restless energy. She whispered that the shadow was not a passing cloud or a stray animal. It moved with purpose. It came close, then pulled away, as if measuring the right moment. He felt his heartbeat heavy in his chest, each breath sharper than the last. The sunlight dimmed again, not from a storm, but something crossing the open sky just long enough to darken the room. She stepped away from the window quickly, her eyes wide now, her pulse visible in her throat. He tried to turn toward her, tried to ask what she saw, but before he could speak, she moved toward the door with quiet urgency. She placed her hand on the wood, listening. The entire ranch seemed to hold its breath. The air turned still, the animals silent, the land waiting. She looked over her shoulder at him, her expression torn between warning and reassurance. He gripped the arms of his chair, feeling helpless yet alert. Sensing the shift in the air even without seeing it, the door creaked slightly under her hand. She hesitated. Then she slowly pushed it open, letting the warm light spill into the room. But what she saw outside made her freeze in place, her breath catching as her eyes locked on something beyond the porch. She stepped aside so he could see, her voice low and tense as she whispered that the shadow was no longer hiding and standing at the edge of the field. Right beside the tall line of grass was a figure watching the house in complete stillness. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hand gripping the frame as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. He tried to lean forward to see more clearly, but from the wheelchair his view was limited. She stepped slightly to the side, enough for him to glimpse the figure at the edge of the tall grass. The shape stood still, too still to be someone passing through. The hat, the long coat, and the stance all signaled someone watching with purpose, not curiosity. The way the figure faced the ranch house made the air inside tighten even more. A quiet uneasiness swept through him. He felt it in his chest and in the hollowness of his legs. She whispered that the figure had been standing there longer than she first thought, maybe even before the shadow crossed the window. It sent a cold shiver through him. Someone had been watching the ranch in silence, measuring their steps, choosing when to appear. Whoever it was, they were not simply lost or wandering. They had come with intention. She stepped back into the room, closing the door part way, but leaving enough space to keep watch. Her breaths were slow, but he could tell she was forcing herself to stay calm. She had always faced difficult moments with courage, yet even she felt the tension pressing into the walls now. He asked her what she thought the stranger wanted. She shook her head, saying it was too early to know. But she did not like how they stood without moving, so waiting for something or someone inside the house. He looked down at his legs again, frustration tightening his jaw. He hated being trapped like this, unable to stand, unable to protect her or the ranch from whatever danger approached. The room felt smaller as the minutes stretched. She finally pulled the thin curtains across the window, not fully shutting out the light but hiding their movements from outside. She moved with caution, making sure not to draw attention. Then she turned toward him and told him something had been building long before today. She reminded him of the missing livestock, the broken fences, and the silent tracks near the barn. She said the ranch owner had suspected a group of men working in secret near the ridge. Men who wanted more land than they had and used fear to push people away. The frontier had seen these types before. They came quietly, stayed hidden, and waited until someone felt weak enough to target. Her voice lowered as she told him the accident at the ridge might not have been an accident at all. He felt his breath catch. The thought had crossed his mind before, but he pushed it away, thinking it came from his frustration. But now, hearing it spoken out loud, made something in his chest tighten. She noticed the change in his expression and came closer. She said she believed someone tried to scare him off the ridge that day or worse. They might have followed him, watched him, waited for a moment when he was alone. He felt his hands curl tightly around the arms of the wheelchair. She told him she needed to check something at the back of the house. The stranger outside had not moved, but she sensed more than one person nearby. She asked him to stay close to the window, but not visible from outside. He felt helpless again, but her tone left no room for argument. She walked toward the back door, moving quietly across the wooden floor. He listened as her steps faded down the hall, leaving him alone with the silence. The sunlight drifting through the curtains felt heavy, almost watchful. Every sound outside seemed sharper. A distant creak from the barn, a soft rustle near the fence, a horse snorting in unease. He wanted to push the wheelchair forward to get a better view, but hesitated. If the stranger saw the movement, it might change everything. He waited, forcing himself to breathe evenly. His mind drifted to the months before his injury. He remembered the cattle drive on the open plains, the long days patrolling the ridge, the sense of freedom he used to carry. He remembered seeing unfamiliar riders near the canyon, men who didn't speak to anyone in town and kept their hats low. He thought about the night he camped near the ridge and heard footsteps around his tent long after dark. He dismissed it at the time, thinking it was animals. Now the memory felt sharper, more intentional. He wondered if they had been following him longer than he knew. He heard a distant knock from the back of the house. It was a soft tap like something brushing the wooden wall. His pulse quickened. He called her name, but his voice carried a slight shake he did not intend. She responded from the other room, her tone steady but tight. She said the back fence had fresh tracks leading toward the fields. Not animal tracks. Human tracks. In more than one set, she came back into the room quickly, her dress brushing the doorway as she stepped inside. She told him the strangers had been circling the ranch from both sides, not just the front. They were closing in slowly, probably waiting until the sun lowered, or until the ranch house felt isolated enough for them to act. The idea made the room feel colder. She walked toward the table and reached for the lantern, checking the wick and the oil. She told him they might need light soon, even though the sun still hung high. She explained that people who move like this preferred dusk, when shadows stretched longer and people grew less alert. He watched her work with careful hands, admiring the calmness she held, even when fear tried to seep into the room. He asked if she thought the stranger at the edge of the field was part of the same group that had caused his accident. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes full of truth she did not want to say aloud. But he understood. The same men who had stayed hidden before might have returned now, thinking he was no longer a threat. Thinking the ranch was vulnerable, thinking he was too broken to stand in their way. She told him the land around the ranch had become valuable recently. Water from the nearby creek had expanded, turning the fields greener and more fertile. Anyone wanting to control the frontier land would want this piece more than any other. If they believed the ranch was unprotected, they would try to take it. She said they were not counting on her being here, or on him still having the will to fight. He asked how many she thought were out there. She did not answer right away. Then she said she believed there were at least 3 or 4, maybe more, hiding beyond the fields. The still figure they saw might be the lookout, the one sent to test how alert the ranch house was. He felt a heavy knot forming in his chest. He wanted to stand up, to reach for a rifle or step onto the porch, but his legs stayed motionless. The feeling of uselessness crept up his spine, but she did not let his silence turn into despair. She knelt beside the wheelchair and told him something he did not expect. She said that even though he could not walk, he still had the mind, heart, and experience of a man who once protected this land better than anyone. She believed he saw things others would miss, felt danger before it arrived, understood the land in ways no one else did. She needed his instincts now more than ever. Her eyes held a seriousness that pulled him out of his frustration. She asked him to think again about the fall at the ridge. Every sound, every detail, she wanted to understand what they were dealing with. He closed his eyes and let the memory come back piece by piece. The loose gravel, the distant rustling, the feeling of being watched. He remembered a faint whistle carried by the wind just before his horse stumbled. A whistle that did not come from nature. A whistle meant to signal someone. She listened carefully, leaning closer as he described it. When he finished, she stood slowly, her expression tightening. She said the stranger at the field edge had something in his hand, something long and thin, something he might use to signal others with a sound carried by the wind. Before he could respond, a sharp clang echoed from the barn outside. It was the unmistakable sound of metal hitting wood. The horses let out a startled cry. She rushed to the window and pulled the curtain aside, just enough to see her breath caught. He asked what she saw. She did not answer right away. She turned toward him, her voice low and tense. There was now a second figure standing beside the barn, and this one was closer than the first. She kept staring through the narrow opening in the curtain, her breath tightening as she watched the second figure move near the barn. The way he stepped along the wooden wall showed he was not just wandering. He was searching, measuring, studying the ranch with slow intention. She whispered that he carried something in his hand, something shaped like a tool, but held like a weapon. He felt his pulse climb as he tried to lean forward in the wheelchair to see better. Even though he already trusted her instincts, it's more than his own eyes. She stepped away from the window and closed the curtain fully. The room darkened slightly, but it felt safer that way. She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself before speaking. She said the second man was checking the barn doors and possibly the stalls, looking for signs of how many people lived on the property. She believed he wanted to know if the ranch had enough manpower to fight back. When she said that, he felt the weight of his condition sharper than before, as if the men outside could sense weakness through the walls. She walked to the table and collected a few items. Her movement slowed to avoid making noise. She reached for a small knife, not a weapon fit for a fight, but something better than empty hands. She set it near him on the table in case he needed it, even though she knew he could not stand. Her eyes softened for a moment as she looked at him, as if she wanted to apologize for the world being unfair to him. But she did not speak pity. She spoke determination. She told him they needed to think ahead, not wait for the strangers to make the next move. If the group outside believed the ranch was empty or poorly guarded, they would strike as soon as the sun dropped. The thought of that made the room feel even smaller. He clenched his jaw and tried again to move his legs, commanding them with every ounce of will he had. But nothing changed. The numbness stayed rooted in place. Refusing to give him even the faintest twitch, she noticed the frustration growing inside him and knelt beside the chair. She told him he was not useless. Not now. Not ever. He still had control of the one thing the strangers feared most: his knowledge of the land, his ability to read the wind, the tracks, the signs that others ignored. She said she needed that more than she needed a weapon. He lowered his gaze for a moment, struggling to accept her words. Yet something in her tone made a small flicker of strength rise. Inside him, he told her the second figure near the barn was not the last. He could feel it in the air, the same way he used to sense approaching storms, before clouds formed. He said the strangers moved in arcs, circling the property. He remembered the patterns from patrol days when rival groups tried to intimidate ranchers by surrounding them without attacking right away. She listened carefully and adjusted her thoughts around his knowledge. She trusted him completely. That trust steadied him more than any physical strength could have. She asked him how many he believed were out there. He thought quietly before speaking. He said 3 or 4 was the minimum. If one was a lookout and one was checking the barn, the others had to be watching other directions or staying hidden near the trees. He said groups like that never came with just 2. They watched for weaknesses, waited for fear to grow, then pushed forward. She nodded, her expression tight with focus. She said they had little time before something changed outside. A sudden thud struck the back wall of the house. Not loud, but strong enough to shake the dusty shelf near the window. She turned sharply, her breath catching. He felt his grip tighten around the arms of the wheelchair. She tiptoed toward the back room again, her steps light and controlled. He listened closely, each sound echoing louder in the silence. The thud came again, followed by a slow dragging noise along the wooden boards of the outer wall. She returned quickly, her face pale, but her voice steady. She said someone was testing the back of the house, running something along the wall, as if checking for weak spots. The idea made his stomach twist. She moved to the window again, but this time she did not pull the curtain aside. Instead, she listened. She waited for the next sound. When it came, she reached for his hand and whispered that they needed to stay quiet. The stranger outside was close enough to hear even a small breath if the room wasn't careful. He swallowed hard and nodded, forcing himself into stillness. The room felt tighter than ever. Even the air seemed to hesitate. She held her breath as the dragging shifted to the side of the house, inching along the boards with slow purpose. She whispered that the stranger might be mapping the structure, learning where each room was. She said if they made a noise, he would know exactly which window or door to approach first. The dragging stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was far heavier. She leaned closer to him, unsure if the stranger had stepped away or if he now stood still, listening. The horses outside began to shift, their movements tense. One of them let out a low sound that echoed through the yard. The stranger near the barn towered near the stall door, his shape briefly visible through a gap in the curtain. She whispered that they needed to move him away from the main window. She did not want the strangers to see the wheelchair or understand the weakness inside the house. She pushed him to the far corner gently, her hands steady, even though her heartbeat quickened. He helped as much as he could by lifting his arms and leaning his weight to ease the turn. She positioned him near the small table in the corner, where the shadows covered more of the room. She told him she had to find a way to warn the ranch owner and the nearby neighbors. But she could not leave him alone, not with the strangers this close. She moved to the other side of the room, looking through the cracks in the wooden wall to check if the stranger outside had stepped away. She whispered that something about the group felt familiar. She said the man near the barn walked with a slight limp on his right leg. She had seen that before in town weeks ago, when a group of unfamiliar riders passed through quietly, buying supplies without making conversation. He remembered them too. They kept their faces shadowed and avoided eye contact. He remembered a tense feeling in the store that day. He recalled the same limp. He wondered how he had not connected the signs earlier. Now the realization settled like a stone. The people who had caused trouble near the ridge had not vanished. They had returned with purpose. Another sharp sound echoed from outside, this time closer to the front of the house. She stepped back from the wall and returned to him quickly. She said the lookout was gone from the edge of the field. He had moved. She did not know where. The uneasiness in her voice made his chest tighten. The ranch was being closed in from all sides. The strangers were no longer watching. They were preparing. She stood in the center of the room, her breath unsteady, but her eyes full of determination. She told him she would not let anything happen to him. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her he believed in her strength. But before he could speak, the floorboards near the front door creaked softly. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Someone had stepped onto the porch. She turned her head toward the door slowly, every muscle in her body tightening. He felt his heart pound harder, each beat echoing in his chest. The stranger outside did not knock. He did not call out. He simply stood there, silent, waiting. The air in the room turned cold. She reached for the knife on the table, her hand trembling slightly for the first time. The porch creaked again, closer to the doorframe. He leaned forward, gripping the arms of the chair as if preparing for something he could not physically face. The tension grew so thick he could feel it press against his skin. Then a shadow passed under the small gap of the door, and the handle began to turn. The handle turned slowly, the metal clicking in a way that made both of them freeze where they were. She stood with the small knife held close to her side, ready to defend him, even if she had to face more than one stranger alone. He held his breath, gripping the arms of the wheelchair as if he could anchor the whole house through sheer will. The seconds stretched like long ropes, pulling tighter until it felt like the air might snap. Then the door pushed inward an inch. A sliver of the porch light cut across the wooden floor. She braced herself for whoever stood behind it. But before the stranger could step inside, a loud shout came from somewhere near the barn. The voice was strong, deep, and unmistakably familiar. Someone else had arrived at the ranch. The footsteps on the porch paused. The handles stopped moving. Another shout followed, this time nearer, commanding and sharp. She darted toward the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see. Her breath left her in a relieved rush. The ranch owner and two neighbors were sprinting through the yard, each carrying tools and ropes that could be used for defense. They had seen the strangers circling earlier in the day and finally decided to investigate. She whispered the news to him, and he felt a surge of relief so strong that it warmed every hollow space inside him. Outside, a man near the barn tried to flee, but the neighbors moved faster than he expected. They caught up to him and knocked the tool from his hand. The lookout from the edge of the field tried to disappear into the tall grass, but the ranch owner's horse cut off his path, forcing him to drop to the ground where he was quickly restrained. The men surrounding the ranch had never expected resistance, especially not from more than one direction. The stranger at the door hesitated for a moment. Realizing he was outnumbered and cornered, he backed off the porch and ran through the yard, but he didn't make it far. One of the neighbors tackled him near the fence. Within moments, all the strangers were pulled together and tied securely, while the ranch owner demanded to know why they had come. Their plan unraveled quickly. Under pressure, they admitted they had been hired to intimidate ranchers in the area, scaring them enough to abandon their land. The ridge accident had been part of the plan too. They had hoped his fall would lead him to give up the ranch completely. The truth hit him hard, but it also brought a strange sense of closure. He had not imagined the danger. He had not fallen by weakness or mistake. Someone had pushed him toward that moment, but the stranger's plan had failed. The ranch still stood, and he was still alive even if his legs could no longer carry him. She placed her hand on his shoulder with a gentle pressure, grounding him in the present and reminding him he was no longer alone. The ranch owner approached the house, calling out to ask if everything inside was safe. She opened the door finally, letting the fresh air wash into the room. The ranch owner stepped in and saw him in the corner. For a moment, the older man's eyes softened with worry, but then he looked at her and nodded with a grateful smile. If she had not stayed alert, the strangers might have succeeded. She had saved them all. He thanked her, his voice carrying the gratitude of a man who had weathered many storms. She simply nodded and said she could not stand by while danger crept near the people she cared about. Her eyes flicked toward the man in the wheelchair, and the ranch owner noticed. A knowing smile crossed his face before he turned to help the neighbors secure the strangers for the sheriff. When the yard finally grew quiet again, she returned to him and knelt beside the chair. The tension had eased from her face, replaced by warmth and a calm steadiness. She told him that the worst was over, that the land was safe again, and that he did not have to fear the shadows anymore. His breath slowed. Something inside him loosened in a way it hadn't since the day of the fall. He stared at her. Realizing how deeply she had risked herself to protect him, she had stood between him and danger without hesitation, believing in his worth, even when he no longer believed in it himself. His voice wavered as he told her she had saved him more than once. Not just today, but every day since she walked into his life. She smiled softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She told him she didn't save him. She just reminded him of who he truly was. Outside, the sun began to lower, casting a warm glow over the fields. The ranch owner and neighbors finished tying the strangers to the wagon to take them into town. The horses finally calmed, grazing again as though the danger had never existed. She pulled the curtains open so he could see the horizon lit in gold, the land stretching peacefully before them. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel trapped. He felt grounded. He felt hopeful. She sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She told him the frontier had always been a place of hardship, but also a place of second chances. She believed he had one waiting for him. He swallowed, feeling the weight of her words settle warmly inside. He told her he wanted to try, not just to endure, but to live again. And if she didn't mind, he wanted her by his side while he figured out how to build a new life. Her smile grew, gentle and full of affection. She told him she had seen strength in him from the first day she walked into the room, even when he tried to hide it. She said she would stay, not because he needed help, but because she wanted to be part of his future. The room felt lighter instantly, as if the walls themselves breathed easier. As the sun dipped lower, the ranch owner returned briefly to check on them. He gave them both a proud look, the kind a father might give to two people who had chosen the right path. He reminded the man in the wheelchair that strength was not only measured by how far a person could walk. Sometimes it was measured by how deeply they could endure and how much they could still love despite hardship. The words settled in his heart like a steady flame. When the ranch owner left again, she gently rolled his wheelchair toward the doorway so he could feel the warm evening air. The scent of dust and pine mixed with the soft glow of sunset. She stood beside him, her hand resting on the back of the chair, and together they watched the sky shift from gold to amber. He felt a sense of peace he had not known since before the fall. He told her that even though he had lost the use of his legs, he finally understood he had not lost his future. She was part of that realization. She had seen him as the man he used to be, then as the man he still was, and now as the man he could become. She leaned down, placing a soft kiss on his forehead, telling him he had always been worthy of love. He blinked against the warmth rising behind his eyes. They stayed in the doorway until the sky turned deep blue. The ranch was safe. The strangers were gone. The fear had been replaced with a quiet sense of hope. He felt something strong inside him, something new yet familiar. Like the first step of a journey he had never imagined taking. He reached for her hand, and she intertwined her fingers with his. Together, they looked out over the frontier land, ready for whatever the future held. And in that peaceful moment, he realized he had not lost everything after all. He had found something far greater. He had found the person who saw him as the love of her life. And at last, he believed he could love again too.